Thank you. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you a little bit about games. I'm sure some of you don't like games, but hopefully by the end of the session you will think a little bit more kindly of games. It was George Bernard Shaw who said, "We don't stop playing because we grow old because we stop playing." And when we come into this world as babies, we interact, we learn through play. Play is natural. And when we get older, we still enjoy problems and puzzle solving. And when we attach rules to puzzles, they become games. I joined the games industry not long after chess was invented in 647. I started a games company called Games Workshop with two old school friends, John Peake in the middle, Steve Jackson on this side, the really handsome guy at the far end, that's me. We want to turn our hobby of playing games into the business of making them. And we published this full-color glossy magazine called Alan Reason and set it out to everybody we knew in games. This was in February 1975, and one of the recipients was Gary Gygax, who lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Gary is really, we have a lot to thank Gary Gygax for, because he created a game called Dungeons and Dragons, and it didn't look very much, the box was very average, but it opened up the whole world of the imagination like no other game had ever done before. Here was a game which was really of a designer game kit. There was no beginning really or end. Players took on the roles of fantasy characters and explored through conversation a world that was created by the dungeon master. So you could be a fighter, a hero, a wizard, and a cleric, and you took on this role. And through this conversation, you explored these fantastic worlds. Steve and I became immediately obsessed with D&D, and we ordered 6 copies of it, because that's all the money we had in the world. On the back of that incredible order, we got a 3-year exclusive distribution agreement for Europe, because Gary Gygax was also living out of his flat, and he just happened to think this was a great expansion into Europe. So we went over to the States. This was Gen Con in 1976. Steve at the front. John Peake had left by that time because he didn't like role-playing games. He wanted to make traditional wooden games. Rob Kuntz wrote lots of the D&D manuals, standing next to me, holding the boxes, and to my right was Professor Bark, another games designer, Gary Gygax himself, and Fritz Lieber, the science fiction author. The worrying thing about this particular slide is that the 3 people to my right are all dead, and I'm kind of next in line, but I'm still hanging in there, which is great. So we also got to meet Miss Wisconsin, 1976. I don't know what she's doing today, but I'm really enjoying myself talking to you. We came back and wanted to expand our business because we signed up all these fledgling games companies. And so you go to the bank manager and say, I've got this great idea for a game. It's a role-playing game. You take the roles of wizards and heroes who go on these fantastic adventures of the mind, and we want to expand our business. Can we borrow some money? And he looks at you rather like a dog watching television and ushers you out of the door thinking these people are mad. And I think it's always been very difficult for people to understand the value of games and the creative industries and the value of intellectual property, especially when the IP is digital and intangible asset, very difficult to value. But nevertheless, we struggled on. And as I said, we were working in our top floor of our flat in Shepherd's Bush. People were expected to find a shop, of course, but there wasn't one because we were upstairs. We didn't have a phone in our flat, of course. This was pre-mobile, and the only phone was on the ground floor, which we also shared with our landlord, Paddy. Now, when people were always wandering around in the streets looking for us, we would say, lean out the window, say, "You want Games Workshop up here, mate?" So there's people coming up and down the stairs. The phone would ring, try to get down the stairs before Paddy picked up. On a Friday, he liked to drink. "Hello, you want Games Workshop, do you? Go to hell." And he used to hang up on them. And we quickly understood the value of public relations. Nevertheless, so we had to make a choice. The bank manager wouldn't lend us any money. We had no cash. All the cash we had was reinvested in stock. So we managed to find a small office at the back of a squash club in Shepherd's Bush, which was very convenient because we had to live in a van for 3 months. because we had to make a choice whether it's somewhere to live or somewhere to operate off. So, because Paddy had kicked us out of the flat by then. But that was okay. We got very good at squash by default. So we went in there, went to the squash club early morning, out of the van, shave, shower, etc., and then into our little mail order office and back into our little office. And here it is. So 1976, smiling away in our tiny office. We opened our very first shop in 1978 in Hammersmith because, largely because we couldn't get other people to stock Dungeons and Dragons. And we staffed it with hobbyists themselves. And I think that's one thing that's being carried on to this day, is that we didn't want to hire traditional retailers. We wanted people who were passionate about the hobby themselves. So we had more of a Games Workshop experience than a retail store. If we'd taken people from traditional retailers, they wouldn't have been as successful as promoting our products, because they were quite obscure, they're quite involved. And so they taught the children how to paint the miniatures, how to play the games, and that was very infectious. So they might look like Visigoth raiders from the barbarian north, but they were actually brilliant retailers. Anyway, if any of you are in that queue, please let me know. Wherever I talk, I try and find more. I found 2 people so far, and we are going to do a sort of Abbey Road reunion shot at some point. But it might be a bit of a struggle, because if you go past it these days, it's the Bosnia and Herzegovina Community Advice Centre. So we might have to do a bit of Photoshop when we get to that point, but never mind. And there's some of our highly fashionable people in the 80s working in our stores. But today, don't worry about workshop, publicly quoted company, 300 stores, and doing very well. So games like role-playing games, got children very excited because they took control. They were creating these wonderful worlds of the imagination. And we wanted to take that to a wider audience. So Steve and I came up with the Fighting Fantasy gamebook idea. Now, these were books that looked like traditional books, but they were totally different in how you read them, because these were books and you, the reader, were the hero. You took control of the adventure. You made choices, and that was very empowering. At the end of each paragraph, you had to make a choice, whether to turn left, turn right. If you found a key in one room, you'd be able to open a door further on down the passageway. And there was, in fact, kind of what you now call that sort of strange term, gamification of literature, sort of branching narrative with a game system attached to them. And they sold 17 copies worldwide, which is great. We convinced Penguin Books that we should be in charge of the covers, because we understood our audience because of Games Workshop, so we commissioned our artists, because Penguin wanted to publish it through Puffin, and the Puffin editors thought, well, they're for children, therefore we'll have covers with little toadstools and nice little gnomes sitting on them and butterflies around. And we wanted covers that threatened to rip the faces off the readers. So we won that battle. So they were published in 32 languages. And sometimes when we let the local market decide what covers they should be, things got a little bit strange. Like, for example, in Japan, here's a cover of Death Trap Dungeon. I can't really comment on that, but just to have to make your own mind up. Very strange, the cultural differences found sometimes. So, 17 million copies, children are reading. Isn't this a great thing? But no, of course it wasn't, because the media at the time we were struggling with the concept of our interactive books. Children were completely immersed and seemingly enjoying themselves. So the Evangelical Alliance thought that was a bit of a worry, that you were interacting with ghouls and demons, you were clearly going to be possessed by the devil. A worried housewife in deepest suburbia phoned in her local radio station and said that having read one of my books, her child levitated. So the children were thinking, for £1.50, I can fly, we'll have some of that. And a local vicar promised to chain himself to the railings of Penguin Books until the books were banned. Of course, I'd like to thank them all for the incredible publicity that they gave us. Without them, they wouldn't have been so successful. But history has never been kind to games. Even in the 1850s, Scientific American rallied against games, saying people should be doing much more nobler things with their minds rather than having a frivolous activity of playing games. And when it comes to video games, of course, the media tends to go into an apoplectic frenzy when they're talking about games. Now, Grand Theft Auto 5 is 18 rated. Children shouldn't be playing this game, by the way, in the same way you wouldn't let children watch 18 rated games. It's a great British success story. It generated $1 billion in 3 days. This is the largest entertainment franchise in any medium. And it also is a pastiche of American society. And it really should be celebrated for the economic and cultural contribution it makes, rather than being castigated as the cause of all evils in society. I made the transition from analog to digital, first by designing a game for a startup company called Domark in the 80s, a game called Eureka, and I joined the company when exiting from Workshop, and we put 4 companies together, floated on the London Stock Exchange in '95 under the banner of Eidos. And of course, Eidos was perhaps best known for Lara Croft Tomb Raider. What started off as a simple sketch designed by Toby Gard, our artist at Core Design, ended up being a multi-billion-dollar franchise. And one of the things that I'm passionate about is understanding that we should really invest in our creative industries. We often see them as fluffy industries run by lobbies, but they're creating incredible intellectual property, which we can scale. And if one thing this country does have, it's creativity, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So, Lara Croft survived the test of time, multi-billion-dollar franchise, not just the publishing revenues from the game itself, but incremental revenues from licensing and merchandising through the Lucozade campaign, which also supports the game at the same time. The movies, 2 blockbuster movies with the incredible Angelina Jolie playing the role of Lara Croft. We filmed these at Pinewood. I did meet her a couple of times. I'm still recovering from that, but she was quite an amazing character, a wonderful person as well. So a little bit about the games industry, where it came from. When it started off in the 60s as a laboratory simulation, wasn't commercialized, 2 spaceships with limited fuel and missiles battling it out. And it wasn't until the Atari Corporation, Nolan Bushnell, in the 70s creating Pong. Very easy to understand, got a lot of people playing, avoid missing ball for high score, and you were able to play. 2-player, had that magic fairy dust of wanted to play and win. And Atari took that initiative in the late 70s with the 2600, entered the living room with interchangeable cartridges, multiplayer, became a household phenomenon. Japanese jumped on the bandwagon, dominating the arcades in the late 70s with games like Space Invaders. And I'm going to show you a little pastiche of the early games. Just want to have a little drink of it. It's hard to imagine. It's nearly 20 years ago since Lara Croft first started bumping into doorways and killing endangered species. Today, of course, consoles like Xbox One, PlayStation 4, PCs, cinematic experiences, huge production values driving the art form in new ways. But of course, for many people, consoles are intimidating. The fact that it's got 16 buttons, people don't want to appear stupid, so they would rather not play games and subject themselves to being humiliating failures at games. But so it remained a niche market for many years, a successful one. But then along comes Apple and really nails the user interface by creating swipe technology. So anyone with a simple swipe of their finger across a screen, touch screen, can become a games player. And so new audiences are being able to be found by new independent developers making their games in a new way and really expanding the art form. So games have become mass market entertainment, and games like King with Candy Crush and Supercell with Clash of Clans, both these games generating over $1 million a day through in-app purchases and upselling content inside them. So games have moved from a kind of a niche to a mainstream audience. Children play, of course, young people play, old people like me still play games. Everyone's playing games. You don't have to look on public transport to see people enjoying games. So there's 1 million game apps on the various app stores. You get audiences, happened quite recently at Wembley, of up to 100,000 people watching games being played on large screens. And these games are live and being served to over 100 million subscribers to a games channel like Twitch. There are 100 million people subscribing to Steam. This is a large business. It's $100 billion a year in software sales alone. It's the largest entertainment industry in the world. And there's always technology that advances the opportunities, of course, not without some threats, but it evolves like no other entertainment industry because of advances in technology. And of course, VR is the new thing on the horizon. But beyond entertainment, I would argue that games are actually very good for you. A, they're social. B, they're considered an art form. BAFTA recognizes the cultural impact with the BAFTA Games Awards. And you think, what's happening cognitively, if you just park your prejudice against one or two titles and think what's happening when you play a game. You cannot get through a game without problem solving. You're required to solve a problem. You cannot advance without that. Games give you continuous assessment. You get instant feedback of how well you're doing. You're managing resources, a game like Roller Coaster Tycoon, where you're taking control, you're actually building the theme park, staffing it, seeing what happens when you do the pricing. And by taking control, this is learning by doing. And so often the case in learning for children is that they're bored to death by people who talk at them. And because they're not involved with that learning, they soon forget. Games allow you to step inside history, games like Civilization, and again, take control of events. And games, I think, empower creativity like no other medium in my mind in the digital sense. Games like Minecraft, I'm sure as parents you've seen how fulfilled children are when they're building these wonderful 3D architectural worlds, effectively like digital Lego, and sharing them with their friends. This is pure creativity, learning about maths, about physics, about building, about design, architecture. All these things are happening when you're creating. We all understand the creative component of playing with Lego. This is effectively digital Lego. So I would argue that games give you life skills. Learning can be fun, and learning by doing is very powerful. So whether it's community, creativity, the multitasking, I'd say this is a great thing because it's a case of hands-on, minds on. But of course, as responsible parents, we have to get a balance. We can't let children do anything at the exclusion of everything else. So it's us on us. And games are very motivational, whether it comes to rehabilitation. These are a good thing. There was a program a few weeks back on Horizon where they took a very scientific look at games and wondering, do violent games make people violent? And the conclusion was that you might have a sort of slight increase in your emotional state, like if you were arguing about politics or about football or something, but games do not make you violent. Games, in fact, were proven to be good in the sense that, in old people in particular, your brain capacity actually increased. And they argued that doctors of the future might actually prescribe tablets on which you play games rather than getting old people to swallow tablets, because of the multitasking aspect actually expanded their brain capacity. And if any of you are still in doubt about games, think about how it can be used in a very positive sense. I've become an ambassador recently for special effects who use technology to modify games equipment to give a quality of life to children who otherwise would not have that quality of life. Powerful stuff. So one day I'm hoping for a headline like this. Might not be in my lifetime, but hopefully one day. I just saw a little talk, a little bit of the context of games within the creative industries. I wrote this review with PwC, which was launched last month, about what we need to do to support our creative industries, and particularly the games industry. And I talk about 7 points, 7 Ps, how we have to invest in our games industry and all creative industries. About the perception, how we have to get away from this negative perception about creativity, about these are proper jobs, to send out a good message to children's parents and teachers and to investors to say these are real industries creating valuable intellectual property. We have to paint a better picture, use analytics and data to understand how powerful and big these are, and also how we use data to actually increase the products that we're serving, how we should support clusters, how we should make sure we've got a digital infrastructure that's right for our industries. We often hear about getting annoyed with broadband speeds. It's not actually games that make you violent, it's lag and latency as you're yelling at the bandwidth, unable to cope. And Sir Joseph Bazalgette, back in the 1880s, who famously built the London sewers 6 times capacity at the time, against all advice, and if he hadn't have done so, the sewers of London would have been overflowing in the 1950s, so we get great thanks to him for that, of course. Again, intellectual property, not just the copyright protection, but allow our creative people to go further down the value chain of ownership, not having to trade it away for project finance, so we can make sure that the revenues are taxed in this country. As often is the case, we get the gongs, the BAFTAs, the plaudits, but the money is banked overseas. So let's make sure our creatives are able to benefit from their own creativity. Let's send messages to people with the money to invest more freely. Creative industries are no more risky than any other industry. And the last thing is P for people, have a skilled workforce. I'll just briefly talk to you about some of the work I've been doing with digital creativity in schools. And we know that children can play games, but how can they actually make them? And games, again, is a great context for children to learn how to code in particular. So we are, I would say, the most creative nation in the world. Film, fashion, music, television, games, architecture, publishing, etc. And games, again, combines art and technology, the sciences and the arts like no other entertainment medium, bringing story, content, and technology together, embracing it. I was chair of Computer Games Skills Council for Creative Skillset for 7 years, and we found that out of 144 courses with the word games in them, we could only accredit 10 as being fit for purpose. Most we had were soft skills, effectively soft media studies, rather than giving the kids the right skills, which is coding, art, and animation. So I complained to Ed Vasey, the culture minister, who's been a great supporter of the creative industries and the games industry in particular. And he tasked Alex Hope and I to write a review, which was published in 2011 by NESTA, looking at the education system for digital industries. We realized it wasn't just about the games industry, it wasn't about using technology, it was how we're going to turn our children from being consumers into creators. And there's a book by Douglas Rushkoff, Do We Direct Technology or Do We Let Ourselves Be Directed by It? We're really at a crossroads. We want our children to be in the driver or the passenger seat of the future, which is so different to our own futures when it happened. Everything is touched by technology. We know that. Retail is disappearing into the internet. Everything is fundamentally reliant on technology. If you think what happens in a digital minute, the millions of Google searches and Facebook posts and tweets, how are we going to be part of that? Is the next giant of technology going to come from this country, for example? So we looked at the whole talent pipeline, why fewer people were studying computer science at university, and we realized that the problem really lay in schools through the narrowness through which ICT was taught. There's nothing more for 30 years, a strange hybrid of office skills, teaching kids Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, fundamentally boring them to death against all odds when they actually love their mobile devices. We were actually not teaching them anything to do with creativity. We were effectively teaching them how to read, but not how to write. They could use an application, they had no insight to make their own application. So our number one recommendation was to put computer science on the national curriculum as an essential discipline, because computing in schools is nothing new. The BBC Micro was a cornerstone of computing in schools in the 80s, and in the homes everybody had a Sinclair Spectrum, an affordable programmable computer. And that gave rise to industries like the games industry. So because it had been commissioned by DCMS, DFA said, go away. Ofsted says ITC is fine, but I said, you actually test them against the wrong metrics. It's so very well saying your candle industry is great if everyone, the rest of the world's gone with light bulbs. But not wishing to give up, being a stubborn Northerner, I founded the Next Gen Skills Coalition, funded by UKI, the Games Trade Association, who've been a fantastic supporter, and got some big hitters on board with us, Google, Microsoft. And Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google, referenced Next Gen in his MacTaggart lecture in 2011, saying he was flabbergasted to learn that computer science wasn't taught as standard in schools. And of course, if Eric said it, it has to be true. And the Prime Minister echoed his words a month later in Tech City, saying he agreed with Eric Schmidt. And that in turn led the doors of DFE, the mighty fortress that it is, to be open. And I met with Michael Gove's special advisors and convinced them over time with a number of other people like Computing at School and British Computer Society that we have to change the ICT. And to his credit, he did. A new computing curriculum came into force in English schools last September, so every primary and secondary school is required to do that. So it's happening right now. It could be transformational for this country. I'd argue computer science is the new Latin. It's going to underpin the digital world in the way Latin underpinned the analog world. It's more of a discipline, it's cross-curricular, it's getting people to think computationally, to problem solve, being ready to have new ideas, diverse thinking of sorting out problems that we don't even know about. So who is going to teach the teachers? Well, there's always going to be a child who knows more about it than the teachers do. So the teachers facilitate a group learning experience, learning alongside the children, hacking their knowledge. There's incredible resources everywhere out there on the internet. You only have to Google them, you see how they can learn this online. And the great initiatives, the BBC often criticise, they're giving away 1 million microbits to every 11 and 12-year-old child in this country later this year. Google invested $50 million with Made with Code. The Hour of Code have had over 100 million views of their page if you take an hour of code. So there's lots of initiatives out there. And of course, we need to do it at an early age, into primary school, because we need to get more women in technology. It should not be seen as a geeky thing. It's more than just databases being written for banks. It's the creative component of coding that's so exciting to create content and services that you can scale to global audiences via super high-speed broadband. I've set up a foundation. I won't talk too much about that, but I want to open free schools. I've applied to open a couple of academies, which are going to take this very much as part of the offering about digital creativity, computer science, art. Because no longer should the classroom be like this. This is for a Victorian age where you used to transplant the kids out of the classroom into a factory. We're living in a fragmented digital world now, and so we need people who are able to think, not just remember. As Richard Riley said many years ago in the US, we have to prepare children for jobs that do not yet exist, rather than keep training for jobs that will no longer exist. Because Generation Z are totally different. They are the connected generation. They are bombarded by media, they have prolific use of social media, and they are different. You only have to see them, they are different. And so we have to talk to them on their terms. The solution to their fidgeting is not a SAR of behavior, because that's not addressing the problem the right way. We have to make sure that we teach them, the new pedagogy of them learning is more connected. So we have to teach them to think, not to remember. We're told all the time that robots are going to play all the functional jobs. So there's no point in training our children as robots, because they're going to have to compete with the real thing soon, so we have to get them to do other stuff. So they have to become problem solvers. Knowledge, of course, is important for literacy and numeracy, but I would say know-how is on a par with knowledge, and it's often seen as a lesser thing. We get after children to be great communicators. We have to accept game-based learning and playful being a good thing. Why can't you use your computer to make music? Why is all the fun stuff that is relevant to your lives done outside of the classroom rather than inside the classroom? And collaboration shouldn't be seen as cheating. That's what we do in the workplace. There has to be more than one answer to any problem. That's what diverse thinking is all about. Not all also academics. All the time, we're told equations in maths. We wonder why children hate mathematics. We have things called smartphones that can do the computational bit of this equation. We have to teach children how, when, and why we should be using this equation. Hands up, any of you can do this quadratic equation? That would be nobody then. And yet, for our maths, we have to do it. And we do it for a brief moment in time and we forget. So why do we persist with this outdated mode of learning by rote? It is totally pointless. So we have to get children to make things do stuff. Rather why they enjoyed reading my books, because it was hands-on. So get them to build a website, get them to make a game, get them to do some of the robotics. And that learning by doing will live with them for life. And we have to encourage them to imagine, to be dreamers, to doodle, anything. That's where ideas come from. And STEM subjects, of course, are important: science, technology, engineering, and maths, but never ever marginalize arts. It's that diverse thinking, that self-expression, that self-determination that comes from the arts, not just for the creative industries, but for all industries. Let's embrace the STEAM agenda, not the STEM agenda. Let's have the arts inside STEM. The great people, the polymaths, Leonardo da Vinci, not only the world's greatest painter, he was also a mathematician and an engineer. He had his right side and his left side of his brain connected. And let's not punish children for their mistakes. We learn through making mistakes. Failure is just success, work in progress. Let them learn, let them do well. And let's not test everybody against the same metrics in an exam. It happened to be, exam question was to push over the tree, of course the elephant wins. We're all different, together we can do great things together. But if we test it against the same metric, which is easy for the DFE to see whether you're good or not, it's wrong, because we're going to be good in some things and bad in other things. For me, exams is really using children as guinea pigs to assess schools and their league tables, rather than wondering whether children are actually learning anything that's going to be useful to them. So we talk about digital, about equal opportunities. I'd say in digital, there is the possibility to have equal opportunities. You give children with naturally inquiring minds the right digital making skills, make them digital citizens, to not be afraid of failure, to give an entrepreneurial spirit, and perhaps make them into job makers rather than job seekers. I think this country and the world will be a better place. Thank you very much. And I hope you all like games now.